Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, once again, delving into another film from classic horror. This, of course, is the film directed by Tobe Hooper and written by him and Kim Henkel from 1974. This, of course, is the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Who will survive and what will be left of them? This film, of course, stars Marilyn Burns, Paul A. Partain, Edwin Neal, Jim Siedow, and Gunnar Hansen playing the legendary Leatherface the first time. And of course we got narration by John Larroquette, which, funny enough, he has always said that his payment for the narration at the beginning of this film was a marijuana joint. I hope he smoked it afterwards, because I'd hate to imagine him smoking it before and then them going in there. John, you're going to have to sound this a little less high. Just take a couple deep breaths before you do that. We're going to need it again. You're rushing through it a little too much. That sounds like it would make for a little quick sketch. Just a thought there. This film was made for about $80,000 to $140,000, and it says its box office was almost $40 million. I'm assuming that is in its first couple runs. But if you think about it, for budget to gross ratio, that's a pretty good amount there. Now remember, this is also that amount in 1970s money, so it went a lot longer than if we were talking about that amount of money nowadays. That's still a good amount of money. I mean, even with the lower scale, that's what I make in just about 2 years. A little bit less, actually. A year and a half, probably. But so just trying to imagine using all that amount of money to make a movie. It is possible. I know my buddy Chris could make a movie for that amount of money today because of how creative he is. Just imagine trying to do a film of any size with that type of money today, though, especially if you were using fully union crews. Not that union crews are a bad thing, it's just that would eat up that budget like that. Now, this is a film that has grown on me more as the years went by, because I first saw it about 22-ish years ago. I don't have the date exactly. All I remember was sometime after the remake came out. I believe I had seen the third film by that point already, so I went back. I watched part 1, I watched part 2. I think I watched part 4 after that, so I watched them out of sequence. And it was a film that I got the appeal for it, but it's a film I didn't really appreciate as much the first time, but then as I rewatched it more and more, it has grown on me. Kind of like how the humor from the second one really has grown on me a lot more as I've gotten older, and like the other parts and how it blends together. With this one, it's probably because its reputation, and then I watched the film, I'm like, this is not the type of film I expected. But then watching it again and understanding its placement in the history of horror as a whole, and then in the history of slasher films, where this is technically in the proto era, and like in the year or two after is where we start to get slashers proper, especially with Halloween, and then we get into the 80s, which is the golden age of slasher films. So this, say a little bit of Black Christmas. Definitely Psycho is a proto one. And then of course my whole thing about the Karras Mummy films being early and retroactive slasher films. Without, of course, the slasher, because obviously you're not going to have a mummy walking around with a knife, but that would have been funny. Karras walking around with a knife. Sounds like an SNL sketch, though. But the film, it does have some blood in it, but it is more of a bloodless type horror. Not as much theater of the mind as Halloween does. That one is definitely more theater of the mind, which fits more with the mystique of Michael Myers. Whereas here, Leatherface living in a cannibal family, using a chainsaw, there's got to be some blood, but there's not like geysers of blood. Like there's not as much blood as in the sequel or in part 3, and definitely not as much as in the remake. But there is enough to get the points across, especially the first murder where Leatherface, first time we see him, he hits some guy over the head with a hammer. Then of course the guy starts seizing. And then the other scenes is only as much blood as there is necessary. Now, the genesis of this film came in a few different places. Like, it's hard to deny that there was some influence from Ed Gein in here, especially with The Mask, farmhouse that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We don't believe Ed Gein used a chainsaw, and obviously he did not have a lot of family members around him after his mother died. That part of the influence with the whole mother-son dynamic, that influenced more Psycho than it did this film, as much as Block wants to try to deny it. Even Even if it's just from the cultural zeitgeist, there was some influence there. Here, there is a little bit of that family one, but it's turned a little bit. Instead of a dysfunctional family where it's a son and a mother, here it's more brothers. Although with the Siedow character, they never really confirm whether he's brother, uncle, father, or whatnot. The way I look at it, he could be like an uncle or he could be an older brother. It is possible, especially with older generations where they had a lot more kids and they were spread out more. You might like have a older son that's like 22 and then you have a younger son that's like 3. So that age gap kind of would make sense. Now, along with that, of course, Hooper at one point was working as an assistant film director at the University of Texas, and he was a documentary cameraman, which when you look at how the film is set up, definitely explains its more documentary-inspired cinematography, which is definitely one of the elements I mentioned earlier that when I watched it the first time, I'm like, which is funny considering I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, but that kind of didn't strike me as bad as the first time. It kind of struck me a little bit more weird here than, say, watching another film from the same era, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. That one, though, kind of it made sense within how that film was set up, so it didn't hit me as much. Now, as he was working there, he was developing a story involving elements of isolation, the woods, darkness, of course, Ed Gein. He watched films like Psycho. And, of course, they had several names for this thing. There was Saturn and Retrograde, which explains some of the dialogue early on. Head Cheese, which, from what I understand, that was mainly just like a pun one. Stalking Leatherface and then Leatherface, which, of course, would later be used as the beginning part of Texas Chain Saw Massacre 3's title. Hooper cited the cultural and political landscape changes as influences. You know, the film you're about to see was a part of it, so he put it as misinformation. And of course with this is what started a little bit of those films that say they're based on true stories that aren't. And you know, it's the whole lie to it, which kind of reflects the skepticism of the Nixon administration, the 73 oil crisis, how their recession was going. And of course, since this was the time period where the Vietnam War was slowly marching towards its end, and of course all the lies and stuff regarding that war, the American public turning against it, and us eventually pulling out of there, you can definitely see a little bit of the influence in there. Even if a film is not about something, usually what's going on in the cultural zeitgeist will slowly have an influence on stuff. So this is an example of even if the art is not about it, it can slowly have a little impact on the themes and all that of it. And in this one, it's more just the whole, yeah, this is true, no it's not type thing. And I guess you could say a little bit of the thing involving the twist at the end where what the character thought was a safe place and was true turns out not to be. And watching that part again, I just love how they, I know it's kind of a big spoiler, but I kind of like how they reveal that the old man guy, played by Siedow, is actually a member of the family. It's not like a big overdramatic like dun dun dun. It's a couple steps down from that. But you look at it and you're like, oh my god. The roadside barbecue is people! Yeah, that should be a meme. It's people! This is what Kim Henkel had to say about the whole Ed Gein thing in it. I definitely studied Gein, but I also noticed a murder case in Houston at the time. A serial murderer you probably remember named Elmer Wayne Henley. He was a young man who recruited victims for an older homosexual man. I saw some report where Elmer Wayne said, I did these crimes and I'm going to stand up and take it all like a man. Well, that struck me as interesting that he had this conventional morality at the point. He wanted it known that now that he was caught, he would do the right thing. So this kind of moral schizophrenia is something I tried to build into the characters. And it's definitely there with the family characters. You definitely see that they have their own sense of morals, but given it the fact it's a family of cannibals, it's a twisted sense of morals. I mean, there's the loyalty to their own, and you can tell that they love each other. And of course, there's also the story of when Hooper was developing the genesis of the story, being stuck in a line at a hardware store, seeing the rows of chainsaws and being like, I wonder what I could do with those to get out. Now, the film was made in the Texas summer. And now, while I've been to Texas, it was during winter. So I cannot really speak on how the summers are, but from what I hear, they can get up there. And there was a couple scenes where they were filming inside where it got to 120 degrees. And boy, did the actors have all said they felt it. And to add to this, there was only the one Leatherface outfit for the main outfit, and they couldn't really wash it that well because it would ruin a lot of the staining and all that. So after a while, Gunnar Hansen was stinking to high heaven. And during lunch breaks, not a lot of people like to sit with him. Which, if anything, that probably impacted the character's sense of isolation, probably helped Gunnar Hansen. And of course, Hansen did go to a home for the mentally challenged and studied them to incorporate that into his character, and you really do get that, especially in the scenes where he's not talking. It's just the way he's moving about, his body language, the way he does like little ticks with his mouth, like on the close-up scene. It all adds to it. And then of course for his scenes where he does have dialogue, it also adds to how he's talking, and of course how the characters that are his family interact with him, because by that point they obviously know how he talks, they can kind of understand what he's saying. And with that, Tobe Hooper actually wrote that dialogue in gibberish and then explained to him this is what it means. And of course with that, there was one take where I guess Hansen articulated the dialogue a little bit too clearly, so he had to pull back and make it a little less clear. Now, going also with that, while we're on that, Leatherface is one of the few slasher characters, and I mean that as the actual slasher, who is very sympathetic. Just think about it. Freddy, not really sympathetic. Kind of hard to make a child murderer and subtextual child molester sympathetic. Pinhead, that's more straightforward than a slasher. It depends on which film we're talking about. Ghostface also depends on which one we're talking about, but not really sympathetic, a lot of them. Jason is, to a point, sympathetic. I mean, he's a drowning victim that was originally avenging his mother's death and then went a little too far. But with how the character is under the surface, kind of is a little bit, because you understand he's a child trapped in a man's body. There's a lot of other ones I can bring up, but not a lot of them are sympathetic. But even then, there's versions of Leatherface that aren't sympathetic, like Part 3 Leatherface, definitely not sympathetic. I mean, kind of hard to make him sympathetic, even though, he's still a little but he's not as much there. When there's a scene where he's like, he knows what to do with them private parts, and then he's like, kind of hard to make him that. I mean, the remake one is a little sympathetic, but he kind of steps a little bit over the line. Texas Chain Saw is a little bit, because it kind of spins off of this one. And the people he kills at the end of it, you definitely say deserve it. Here he definitely is, especially when the first couple people he kills, it's from his perspective, they're trespassing and they're scaring the crap out of him, which of course adds to, after the third person he kills, he's looking outside the window like, where the heck are they coming from? Which leads him going out there, and that's when he does the one big scene. And of course, because of his intelligence and all that, he is very much at the beck and call of his family, and it makes you wonder, if this man had been born into a family that wasn't a bunch of cannibalistic hicks, how would he be? Would he have been in a family that would have raised him better and he would still have issues, but he would have been in a more of a place to get along in society properly? I don't really like to bring it up, but like the old school mentality when it comes to some learning disabilities. Not just the, throw him in the thing, but more like the more positive end of how we used to treat him. Where it's like, yeah, he's a little off, but he does do this one good thing. Well, he makes excellent barbecue, so that's why we have him in the back doing the cooking. Yeah. At the time period, it's a good thing to think about. Or, I don't know if good's the right word, it's an interesting thing to think about. And of course, like I said, it's why he's a little sympathetic because of his circumstances. But he kind of balances out with the fact he's killing people. And in this film, it's one of those ones like you. Now I've gone over this without talking about the plot, but it's one of those plots that kind of speak for itself. There's a little bit of a grave robbing epidemic, and then we get this group of 5 friends, including 2 siblings, a brother and sister duo of Franklin and Sally. They go to this cemetery to see if their grandfather has been dug up. Doesn't look like he has. On the way, they pick up a hitchhiker who is very, very strange. to the point where he tries to attack them. They kick him out, and of course, they stop at the gas station where the old man works. Then they end up going to the house that is owned by their family. It used to be their grandfather's house. Currently, their dad owns it. And I wonder why they never sold it. Maybe it's one of those things like, yeah, it's family house. We can't sell it. We just use it as a vacation home on occasion, or we just need to keep it for the land. Well, they go there. A couple of them wander off, and they find a house out in the distance, not too far away. And of course, this leads to them being offed one by Leatherface. Of course, you get that scene I talked about already, where the first one gets hit in the head with the hammer. And, he gets pulled in, the famous shot of the door slamming. And then, of course, the girl that he went with ends up going inside. And she finds all the bones and the chickens and all that. And this is where you see there's really not a lot of music in here. It's mainly like animal noises. And I think what makes this one, well, is like the chicken noises and like background noises. It adds to the unsettling atmosphere of the film. And then, of course, she gets caught by Leatherface, put on a hook, that famous scene. Then, of course, another guy that gets there gets hit in the head with a hammer. And this is after, of course, she bursts out of the little freezer there. Then, of course, Franklin gets off. That's a famous scene in the dark. Sally, stop. Pans a light. And that's one of the few moments where there's blood. The other one, of course, being when Leatherface hits the guy in the head with the hammer, the first one. But the funny thing is, there is actually some real blood in the chase scene that follows that, and that is when Marilyn Burns' character cut herself on branches, so there is some real blood. And the fun thing about that is if you watch Leatherface in the background of the scene, you can tell he's intentionally doing stuff to slow down because he's running so fast, even in his lifted shoes, that he's catching up with Marilyn, so he's got to really do stuff. It's like in the fighting scenes in certain movies where you can definitely tell that a lot of the henchmen are like waiting their turn and like doing random stuff before they jump in to fight the hero instead of doing the smart thing and ganging up on them all at once. And of course, there's the dinner scene where all of them are there. They're all mocking the Sally character with all the close-ups, like the hitchhiker being like. And of course, Leatherface wearing the pretty woman mask at dinner with the tuxedo and all that. And her tied to the thing, the whole grandpa thing. Grandpa, we're gonna let you have this one. And like I mentioned when I reviewed the second one, he seems a little bit more energetic in the sequel. He's very lethargic here. Part of that might be because of the actor that plays him is really trying to convey that he's playing an old man, so he's more like, blah, blah, blah. It's like me going as like, instead of talking like this is an old man, depending on if I'm doing it for humor or seriousness, it might be, might be a little like this and all that, or be like, oh, back in my day we had to walk 15 miles in the snow with no shoes, and we were happy. But of course, since he has no dialogue, it's all physical, so really makes the character lethargic. And of course, we get the ending, or it's the whole rant where Leatherface is chasing after Sally when she's got the safety in the truck. Because of course, after he falls and hurts his leg, and he's all like doing his little temper tantrum dance, which perfect way to end the film. And that was actually the first scene in the movie I saw, thanks to Boogeyman the Killer compilation. And to go with that, I don't really mention it, but someone did a very interesting TikTok recently with that scene where they put it to some dialogue from Ninja Turtles 1990. Go back here! I'm not finished with you! Where he's like chasing after her. And then for the dance you put, damn! I think I'd like to edit that with the actual footage, see how it flows. Probably be a little funny, but that kind of does sum up how Leatherface is feeling in that scene because he doesn't really talk a lot. And of course Sally all happy and all that. Now what happens with Sally varies depending on which continuity we're looking at. You know, the first sequel that Hooper made, and there's a whole thing where, you know, she was committed, her uncle led to the events of the second film. Yeah, other couple ones, it's like, yeah. This is one of those films that does come with my recommendation, but I had the tentative thing. When you're watching it, remember, made in the 70s, low budget, early time of slashers, so there's not a large body count. Like, including what happens to the hitchhiker, there's really only a body count of 5 people. The 4 people that came with Sally, and then him. I mean, you can probably count unofficially the people that might have been killed off screen to make the meat, but that doesn't count because they probably died beforehand. And you could debate whether you're going to include the truck driver from the end, but I'd like to think he got away. And that's just my thought on it. Now, like I mentioned, the thing with score, the cinematography, for what Hooper's going for, that quasi-documentary style, it's excellent. There's not really a lot of super close-ups. Some of them, it's on stuff that, okay, that's weird, like the little group of daddy long legs that's in the house. It kind of shows how long the house has been abandoned and decrepit. There's a lot of good ones, like when one of the female characters is walking towards the house, the back shot, where it's like pointed up at an angle. The shots when they're approaching the house, the shots out in the woods at night. It's lit where you see mainly the actors and a little bit of the distance, but it also helps with that foreboding sense of isolation that they're going into, to where they don't know where they're going. And of course, they're just going into the lair of a killer family. And of course, the way the whole dinner scene is shot, like I mentioned earlier, the scene where we find out about the old man, where we're like, it's people. The way that is shot up and the way they edited in post, excellent. And of course, a lot of the shots in the van, excellent. I mean, it was like I could pick just a bunch of random scenes from the movie and just talk about how it's all shot pretty well for the quasi-documentary style, but I think you get the picture with that. Just go into this film knowing that this is early on in the slasher film era, you'll have a better time. But if you prefer a more traditional one, definitely 3 in the remake would probably be more up your alley. If you do like a little bit more of the dark humor, definitely 2 would be up your alley. Here, there is some of that dark humor, but it's in moments, especially most of the scenes with the hitchhiker. There's like a couple of the moments of Leatherface, but it's more just from his overreactions to stuff, and a little bit of humor with the death scenes, like the third one where he starts screaming, and it's something you'd expect from a more from one of the heroines and all that. But guy is having a big old guy wearing a mask made of flesh and a hammer coming to him. Of course he's gonna scream. It's one of those things you're like, especially when you walk into it, when you see your friend come out of a freezer. It makes sense to me. But it does add a little bit of that humor. It's just a little bit more restrained compared to the second one. And that's really all there is to say about this film. I have the special edition DVD around here somewhere. I was over on the shelf with the rest of the series entries that I have. Probably should start grabbing them when I'm doing these reviews for it. Now, like I mentioned in 2, next, it's going to be the Legacy sequel that Netflix did. I'm going into it blind other than the scenes that, people were showing. Like that scene. You're going to be canceled, bro. We'll see what my thoughts are. There's only one part of the film I already have a thought on, and of course that's one of the moments people have all been talking about, but that will be next time. Till then, everybody.